Hello, this is Adam Huff with Gwinnett County Public Libraries, and welcome to the first episode of Tales from Another Page, a series where we're going to be discussing classic literature from a variety of cultures from around the world. In honor of Native American Heritage Month, this first episode is focused on Housemaid of Dawn by N. Scott Momaday, largely considered to be one of the most important pieces of Native American literature ever written. But before we talk about the novel, since this is the first episode of a series focused on classics, I'd like to speak for a moment about classic literature as a whole. There's a widely held perception among even reading enthusiasts that the classics are dry, boring, and that they're all so old that there can't possibly be anything in their pages that we could relate to today. When I was younger, I certainly felt that way when I was forced to read Dickens in school. But at some point something clicked for me, and I realized it really didn't matter how much different our world looks from that of Cervantes or Dostoevsky. The literature written by these authors has been remembered for dozens, hundreds, in some cases even thousands of years because they've captured some vital essence of what it means to be a human being, and they put it into a readable form. Just because we have cars and smartphones and use different words or even speak straight up different languages doesn't mean that we aren't subject to the same turbulent beats of life that people were 100 years ago or that people are halfway across the planet even today. And read with the right mindset, classic literature can give us insights into the cultures and times in which they were written. Permeating through every page are the values, priorities, traditions, even the mistakes and triumphs of a particular culture or time. And unlike a textbook or a history book, a novel is immersive, and it's far better at facilitating empathy and understanding. A history book might be a better way to find information about a culture, but a novel dumps you straight into the author's world. It forces you to think how they thought and see the world as they saw it. So while we read through and discuss some of these different pieces of literature, keep in mind a couple of simple questions like, what are the characters' daily lives like? What sorts of things are they concerned about? What are their dreams, goals, aspirations, and so on? Just keeping a few simple questions like this in mind, you may find yourself really surprised at how similar at their core some of these characters are to yourself or people you know, no matter how far away or how long ago the book originated. So the subject of this first episode is Housemaid of Dawn, and one of its main claims to importance is that it won the 1969 Pulitzer Prize, and it was actually the first Native American written novel to do so. It sparked what some call the Native American Renaissance in literature, which I personally dislike because it implies that Native American works preceding Housemaid of Dawn were of a lower quality, which is certainly not the case. Regardless, Momaday's success did inform the styles of an entire generation of Native American authors to follow. And his style is very distinct. It really reflects his heritage and life experiences. He was born in 1935 to a father of Kiowa descent, a Midwestern tribe, and a mother of Cherokee descent. When he was very young, his family moved to Arizona and then to New Mexico, and in this way the Momadays spent much of their time among other tribes, most prominently the Pueblo and Navajo. Eventually attending the University of New Mexico and then Stanford, Momaday's style became this eclectic mix of Kiowa, Pueblo, and Western convention, and that mix, to me, is what makes Housemaid of Dawn so special. The novel is so steeped in tradition that even the first and last words of the book follow Pueblo convention. It begins Daipolo, a word that the Jemez Pueblo used to mark the beginning of a story, and it ends with Quetzitaba, which they use to mark a tale's end. Right off the bat, Momaday is letting readers know that this is a traditional parable-like tale, a vehicle by which he can deliver his wisdom and experience. And from here, the novel goes into deep detail into some of the traditions, myths, and stories of both the Jemez Pueblo and the Kiowa. The narrative is frequently broken up by excerpts of Kiowa and Pueblo poetry, chants, songs, as well as historical accounts, mythology, cosmogony, and more. And despite how saturated it is with the richness of both Kiowa and Pueblo culture, it never felt overwhelming. Momaday's clear, beautiful prose and the book's skeleton of Western convention keep the novel digestible and understandable, even to an outsider like me, despite the depth into which it goes into these cultures. So what is Housemaid of Dawn actually about? The book takes place in both Jemez Pueblo, a reservation in New Mexico, and downtown Los Angeles in the 40s and 50s. The book's protagonist, Abel, is a Pueblo man whose grandfather taught him how to live in accordance with the Housemaid of Dawn, a phrase that they use to describe the rhythm of the natural world around them. He and his grandfather are so in tune with the natural world that they're able to tell what day of the year it is just by the way the sun strikes a particular plateau during the sunrise. But once Abel comes of age, he's sent off to fight in Europe in World War II. While overseas, he experiences a number of ordeals that'll haunt him for the rest of his life. He finally returns home in 1945, but he immediately discovers that everything there just feels wrong. Whether it's because of the violence he endured or the amount of time he was away from home, he finds that his connection to the housemaid of dawn has been severed, and by extension, he no longer feels any connection to his home, his people, or any of their traditions. He stays with his tribe for a time, but as an alien in his own land, he can't really do much but suffer. And this suffering just mounts and mounts and mounts until it becomes a kind of delirium, and in this delirium, he winds up actually just murdering a man. The book picks up again 7 years later in Los Angeles. Abel has been released from prison, and he joins this group of Native Americans who all hail from a variety of tribes and have formed this little community in the heart of LA. Like Abel, they all find that their connections to their homes have been severed, but neither can they find happiness making a living in mainstream America. They are a community of exiles who, like Abel, have no real place to call home. Together, they go to a hilltop once in a while and practice the songs, chants, and recount the stories and tales of their homelands. But despite their efforts, their practice of their old ways does little to help them reconnect with the cultures they left behind. This passage, from the perspective of a character called the Night Chanter, beautifully describes how they all feel. You think about getting out and going home. You want to think that you belong someplace, I guess. You go up there on the hill and you hear the singing and the talk and you think about going home, but the next day you know it's no use. You know that if you went home there'd be nothing there, just the empty land and a lot of old people going no place and dying off. And you've got to forget about that too. You wonder how you ever got along out there where you came from. There's nothing there, you know, just the land, and the land is empty and dead. Abel, however, feels this more strongly than any of them. He suffers immensely in Los Angeles. He's not able to hold a job, he's not able to fake his way through the factory work like the others. Worse, he can't even find a way to connect or even just get along with these other Native Americans on even a basic level, and he even actually winds up fighting one of them. Eventually, reaching rock bottom, he decides that the only chance he has is to go back home to Hema's Pueblo, to his grandfather, to his old tribe, and to try one last time to reforge his connection with the housemaid of dawn. Probably the thing that I loved most about the way that Momaday wrote this novel is that it's told from this pseudo-second-person perspective. The book is undoubtedly about Abel, but it only rarely actually tells the narrative from his perspective. Each of the book's chapters revolve around a different character, a witness to the hardships that Abel goes through. And each of these characters has their own thoughts and ideas about why Abel is suffering and what he should do about it. And each of these characters have a very diverse and often even conflicting set of ideas that explore what different Native Americans, often from completely different tribes, thought about various problems. Abel's grandfather, Francisco, for example, is the only narrator who still retains his connection with the housemaid of dawn, and the prose for his chapters differ greatly from those of the others. His chapters focus heavily on the description of the natural world that surrounds his reservation and the wildlife that inhabits it. In these chapters, if characters are mentioned at all, it's usually only a small footnote compared to the 90% of the page dedicated to environmental description. These chapters are written very beautifully and really help you understand how Francisco views his and humanity's place in the world. By the end of it, the reader's instilled with the feeling that we're only a small cog within the world's natural cycles. These chapters are written with an almost Tolkien-like enthusiasm for nature, and they were very enjoyable to read. Later chapters, however, are mostly written from the perspectives of the friends that Abel makes in Los Angeles. These Native Americans are cynical, and the writing really reflects it. If Francisco's chapters were written to be Tolkien-like, these are written with more of the grit and darkness of a Cormac McCarthy novel. The contrast between these two styles, between the beauty of nature and the grit of the city, really emphasizes the contrast between the two worlds. And it helps us sympathize more with Abel. This difference in prose really drives home that without his connection to the housemaid of dawn, Abel feels like he's been cast down from paradise. The novel, to me, feels like a lament by Momaday for a generation of Native Americans who have lost their connections to their tribes, assimilated into mainstream American society, and just otherwise lost their connection with the housemaid of dawn. And they, as well as the older generations that they've left behind, all suffer greatly for it. One of the things that Momaday has said about this novel, though, is that the experiences it depicts don't apply exclusively to Native Americans. Abel, Francisco, and the Native Americans living in Los Angeles all suffer from problems that are honestly universal. Housemaid of Dawn is a novel about alienation, about losing your connection to your roots, and about a shift in the cultural zeitgeist that leaves behind an entire generation. And I can certainly see that happening in America today. A lot of us younger people look on the old ways of our families and cultures as empty land and old people, just like the exiles living in Los Angeles. And the generational gap now is really only getting widened by the acceleration of technological advancement. If I've taken anything away from this novel, it's just how important it is to maintain our connections to our roots and to the generations that preceded us. And that concludes our discussion of Housemaid of Dawn. If you found this video interesting, please consider checking out the novel from your nearest Gwinnett County Public Library. We also have a number of other books written from Native American voices that I'm sure you'll love.